Yeah. Sorry, Roger, just a second. Somebody's asked for a link from me.
Oh.
Comrades, I'd like to welcome everybody to the meeting. We have a very serious topic to discuss today, and it's against the background of another serious event in our lives. This week, we acknowledge the passing of a comrade who devoted his full life to the movement, that is the movement of the working class. Dave Hempson, born in South Africa, died in South Africa, and spent a lifetime struggling on behalf of the working class in South Africa and internationally. Dave has left a political legacy that will be remembered and recorded for a long time to come. But he has also left a legacy of friendship, of recognition of the humanity that was within the person who was the political activist. And all I can say is, comrades, this week we have lost a very, very solid comrade, an inspiration and a friend to most of us. So I would ask at this stage that we just have just a few moments of silent reflection just to remember David.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, Roy.
All right.
Sorry, just a second, Roy. Roy is going to give us his understanding and his inspirational work, or a record of his inspirational work on behalf of the working class of South Africa, with particular reference to the trade union movement. All too often in countries where there have been national liberation struggles, it has happened that those who led or came to power in those struggles finished up on the side of the system that the struggles were against. South Africa is not unique in this, but South Africa had such inspirational leaders, such inspirational traditions, that the tragedy of what's happened in the trade union movement and in the political movement is so sad. And it is important that those of us who have an opportunity to work within unions, that we try and understand what went wrong in South Africa and why. So I hand the chair or the table over to you, Roy, and it's all yours.
I notice a hand up, so I don't know if Finn wants to say something.
Sorry, comrades, just before you start, Roy, I've only just now learned of the death of David. I hadn't known that, and I find it extremely upsetting and very sad. And I remember meeting Dave originally at international meetings in London. I got to know him quite well in the Win discussions, in which he played a very important role. It's funny, I was about to mention him in the discussion. I came across a reference to a book that Dave had co-authored many years ago, and the book was very favorably reported. But I just want to record my sadness at hearing the news, and as I say, I've just heard it now. And I want to express my sympathy with his family and my sadness at his passing. Sorry, Roy.
And I just say also, sorry, Roy, but I want to propose that we organise a meeting in the near future, which will be a celebration of David's life, not only a tribute to him personally, but also for the whole political history of half a century of struggle, which has actually touched on the political situation and comrades in struggle on 4 continents. So I think I completely echo what Finn has said and Jimmy, but I think we should devote a special meeting to this in the near future.
Yeah.
I think that's taken as agreed, Roger.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, with that, it's back to you, Roy.
All right. Okay, I'd like to, with your permission, just start off with a bit of the background of workers' movements or workers' resistance in South Africa, going back to the past. Um, I'll I'll just do that by introduction, but hopefully I'll go through a little fast with it, if you don't mind. Okay, the history of South Africa is one of colonial wars of conquest, genocide, and slavery in the 17th to 18th century, followed by the indentured labor of the Indian workers in the sugar estates and mines, and the Chinese in building the railways, together with African wage labor in the 19th and 20th century. Racial hostility, prejudices, and labor exploitation of the past centuries are still with us. Forming trade unions among the oppressed people was a huge part of the economic and political struggle. The mining industry began with the discovery of diamonds in 1867 and intensified when gold was discovered in 1886. As early as 1870, the British decided to impose a hut tax on people, on the African workers, and they started with Basutoland, now Lesotho, and imposed a tax of 10 shillings on them, followed a few years later by imposing a hut tax on Zululand. And all of this was meant to drive people who were living on the land into the mines which had been formed. Okay, and the pass laws, compound system, and so on, all of those exacerbated the problems of exploitation and the living conditions of the workers. And just to say that worker committees have existed even before the turn of the 20th century. 400 miners went on strike in 1885 and 1,500 in 1886 at the diamond mines. The first large-scale strike at gold mines amongst Africans were 9,000 compound workers at four mines. Unrest was also prevalent in the sugar estates, with huge strikes of the indentured Indians in 1913. The police opened fire on the striking workers. And here, I would like to dwell a bit on Baruch Essen, who was a Trotskyist, a political prisoner, and he records in his book, Yours for the Union, details of union work done by Trotskyists in the 30s and 40s. I'm not sure if you can see this, but that's Baruch Essen. Essen reported that the trade unions organized on the Witwatersrand in the late 30s did not always start from scratch. There were threads, tenuous and often broken, that started with the ICU and continued through to the first black industrial unions. He reports that in 1937, 1.6 million male African workers, and of these 550,000 were migrant laborers on the mines. That's in 1937. Other Trotskyists who worked during the 30s and 40s, and their names that crop up are Max Gordon and Ralph Lee. Some of them might be known to you because they subsequently came up to London. SACTU, for the 3 decades of its exile, claimed to be the authentic trade union and the sole representative of trade union workers at the ILO and other international bodies. And they sought to influence the trade union movement from London. It should be acknowledged that SACTU and later unions owe their existence to the decades of struggle and sacrifices of unionists that preceded them. And in the 70s, or even in the late 60s, during the period of the bannings of organizations, workers were still on the boil, as it were. And unionists had to operate under the draconian laws, surveillance, arrests, detentions, and bannings. In the Black consciousness movement, for instance, also in the 60s, had been involved in Black trade unionism. We've had Drake Coker, who was the General Secretary of the Black Allied Workers Union. We've had Sasso set up a Black Workers Project in the early 70s. But this follows the 1969 dock workers were struck for more pay. A new wave of worker militancy erupted in South Africa from about 1969. This is despite all of the draconian measures taken by the state and the people being sent to Robben Island and so on. In 1972, so the South Africans were very buoyed by the Namibian strike, a strike in Namibia of 13,000 diamond workers, at least workers in the diamond mines. In 1972 in South Africa, 9,000 workers struck, and they did that with the bus driver strike in June 2000. Durban stevedores were on strike, another 2,000 stevedores in Cape Town, and this is all in 1972. Then came the 1973 wave of Durban strikes, which has been well documented by the race relations and other academics. Just very briefly, if I could just mention the 1919 Industrial and Commercial Workers Union, the ICU, which was a very big union formed in 1919 by Clemens Kadali, who was a school teacher from what is now Malawi. At its height, the ICU had 100,000 members. Unfortunately, factional wrangling had severely weakened the ICU, leading to its demise. In 1922, white miners went on what was a major strike on the mines. Part of this period, you had Black workers working in the mines as well, and there was a tussle between skilled and unskilled workers. And one of the grievances of the white miners that one could pick up was that they wanted to ensure that there was a job reservation for the different categories, because that attracted pay. I think the rate of pay, the difference was about 10-1 in terms of skilled to unskilled laborers. Unfortunately for the Communist Party, the history indicates at that period that they called for workers of the world to unite and fight for a white South Africa. Then we've got the 1979 saw the two commissions set up by the government, the Wian and Rickert commissions, and these commissions asked for a relaxation of the labor restrictions, which was one, to recognize the registration of African trade unions, and it called for the abolition in certain categories of job reservation. Arising from that, we've had the FOSATU unions come up, which was the Federation of South African Trade Unions. These unions tended to lock horns with SACTU because FOSATU positioned itself as what was called a workerist organization, and they were accused of being economists and that they were not prioritizing the national struggle. So even after Fossatu had joined up with COSATU in the merger, and had by and large worked within COSATU in terms of the regulations and the aims and objectives that COSATU had, there were still the differences between FOSATU and what then later became the ANC and COSATU, and FOSATU still continue to linger and bedevil relations somewhat. Okay, when COSATU was formed in 85, after long negotiations, FOSATU dissolved itself virtually. Voluntarily. And the FOSATU structures form the backbone of COSATU. Even though its political alignment shifted towards the ANC, UDF, SACP alliance, the old workerist versus populist tensions continued inside COSATU for decades. Later on, it emerged as some of the NUMSA disputes. Whilst in prison, in his last year in the prison cottage, Nelson Mandela summoned the union leaders to hold discussions with them in the cottage. Any reservations the unionists might have had about the secret prison negotiations and talks and what was to come were swept away by the authority of Mandela being an imprisoned leader, as well as the exiled leadership being in agreement with those at least with the prison negotiations. You would know as well that the people in exile, the ANC in exile, were also holding talks mainly with business leaders, but with the sanctioning and with the permission of the secret, at least of the intelligence services. The intelligence services had set up a person to go through, at least to begin the negotiations with a person who was to become the president later, Thabo Mbeki. In the run-up to the 1994 elections, the country saw huge marches, speeches, and demonstrations led by the COSATU and SACP. Education was disrupted by the teacher unions, SATU. City post offices were occupied at a token level. The so-called Leipzig option was said to be used, that is rolling mass action of the switch on, switch off type. The masses of population were receptive to socialist ideas and to socialism. Union leaders used that opportunity and used that strategy to jockey for positions in parliament. And a cohort of 20 officials of COSATU were placed on the ANC lists and entered parliament. Many became ministers, deputy ministers, others held senior government positions. However, the 1987-1994 South African settlement, I'm talking about 1987 because these arrangements were being made already from about 1987. Big business, finance, minerals, energy, conglomerates were to be left intact. That was part of the settlements. The big business, finance, minerals, energy conglomerates were to be left intact in post-apartheid South Africa. The post-apartheid South Africa was to take the neoliberal constraints from the global markets with creditors, domestic capital, and to prioritize fiscal authority, trade, and financial liberalization. It also called for the settlements for the privatization and the commodification of services. That means water, electricity were to be cost recovery and cut-offs were to be made. Housing was no longer to be mass provided. They were to be low quality, and they became low quality houses of the RDP type, what was called the RDP type. Corporate power, notably the minerals and energy complex and conglomerates, were allowed to internationalize, allowing for capital transfers of the country's wealth which had been earned in the past century was now being allowed for the imperialists to take out of the country. All of this was being done under the false rhetoric of the National Democratic Revolution. I'd now like to go on to the membership of COSATU, at least of the federations. And I'll see if I can pick it up on my PowerPoint. Okay, we've got the membership. Sorry. I'm not sure if comrades can see this, but it's well, we've got the Congress COSATU with almost 2.2 million members. The FEDUSA with 560,000 to 800,000. The National Council of Trade Unions with 300 to 400,000. And the newly formed federation, the South African Federation of Trade Unions, with 700,000 to 800,000. The total union membership, there are about 3.11 million members in South Africa, which account for 25.3% of the formal workforce, which means 77% of the workers are not affiliated to any union. I've got a list of the members of SAFTU and the number of members they have, the different organizations. We have the COSATU as well. You could say that's just a bit of detail, but I think the key point that we're looking at is the 25.3% of unionized members compared to 77% were not unionized. If comrades want me to go through this again at a later stage, I could do that. In addition to this, we have what is essentially a white trade union called Solidarity, and they are an independent union. And I'd like to go now into the investment arms of these trade unions. During the 1990s to 2000, elements of the South African labor movement, particularly COSATU-affiliated unions, became increasingly involved in corporate investment schemes, BEE deals, that's Black Economic Empowerment deals, and stock exchange-linked financial activities. They shifted the leadership priorities away from grassroots mobilization towards institutional partnerships with capital. The transition from class struggle unionism of the 80s and before to bureaucratic or social compact unions from late 1990s onwards. Leaders became involved in boardrooms, Black empowerment consortia, and capital markets. The investments exposed worker organizations to market volatility. There was a lack of transparency around investment companies. In the words of Trotsky, the trade unions are transformed from the vanguard of the proletariat to the tail of the bourgeoisie. The chief culprits or the major investment companies focused around the South African Clothing and Textile Workers Union, SACTWU. It is one of the largest union investment portfolios in the country. It has. Some union officials sat on the boards of the listed retailers and financial firms. Board fees for directors of major listed companies often range between 300,000 to 1 million rand a year. And they were involved in some of the major chains out here in South Africa. The chief culprit here is a fellow who was a leader of the unions, a chap by the name of Johnny Copeland. Johnny Copeland was installed in SACTWU in the 70s by none other than Rick Turner, and he was one of the university students. Anyway, Johnny Copeland gambled with union funds as seed money for his investments, or for the investments of the union. Two of the companies he got the union to invest in were Real Africa Investment Limited, with 1.4 million of the 2 million, 1.4 million rand of the 2 million rand that was available in the union coffers. And he had taken a loan, heavy gearing of 13.6 million from state-owned Industrial Development Corporation. The second was another 90% loan from the state-owned Industrial Corporation, again, to purchase a 12.5 million rand stake in the new technology cellular network of MTN. Copeland's decision in the early 1990s was not acceptable to old trade unionists like Billy Nair, who had served a full 20-year prison sentence on Robben Island. Copeland and a fellow unionist in the finance office were each awarded 1 million rand for contributing to listing Real Africa on the JSE Stock Exchange. Copeland at this time was a parliamentarian in the first Mandela government. The SACTWU Investment Group held shares of board representation in large retail groups at the time when these retailers imported large volumes of cheap clothing, contributing to the deindustrialization and mass retrenchments, a bloodbath of the union's own sector. It was a structural conflict of interest. That the textile industry has not recovered from that, and it's unlikely it would recover under the present regime. The factories that shut down, workers were retrenched, and so on. So far as the Chemical Workers Union is concerned, in their investment arm, they are criticized for its exposure to JSE-listed chemical companies whose labor practices were often at odds with union demands. We go on to the National Union of Mine Workers Investment Company, the MIC or MIT. The investment company is a large union-linked investment vehicle with multi-billion rand assets reported in business profile. Cyril Ramaphosa, who was a former Secretary General of the union and now president, also turned billionaire businessman with the Shanduka Group. He has large stakes in mining, telecoms, banking, McDonald's, South Africa, Coca-Cola bottling, before divesting when he became president as a condition of being president. One is not sure to what extent that divestment is not another ruse that he has arranged in order to still to take up the presidency. During the Marikana strike in 2012, he urged via email for the public order policing, which is a militarized police, to take concomitant action. 34 miners were shot dead at their demonstration site well outside the mine area. It's a classic example of a post-apartheid political business oligarch. Marcel Golding was also a former office bearer. He was a deputy general secretary in the 80s. He had also joined Copland from Sakwu in business deals. He partnered with him in something called HCI, Hoskin's company, and they were involved in media, and you may not believe it, but casinos, property, casinos which had hitherto been restricted within South Africa in the 80s or up to the 80s. Casino licenses were being dished out to any wannabe, or to chosen, I should say, wannabe black businessmen in the provinces. No public body, whether it's the JSC, SARS, or what's called the CIPC, which controls corporatization, are able to give details of the various investments and the earnings of the different partners. They are far too much opaque reporting, or the reporting, financial reporting is very opaque to those who read financial reports. And it must be even more so for ordinary workers to understand what is going on the route that these elite bureaucrats have taken their unions into. NUMSA has also got investment arms. They're not reporting again. There is opaque. FEDUSA, through its public servants, or the Public Servants Association, said that the PSA publicly stated that the government employees pension fund had lost 6.5 billion rand as a result of some shady deals. A lot of these are accounted for accountability. The loss of government pension funds has a direct bearing on all the civil service employees. The Public Investment Corporation manages large public funds of the pension. The losses affect millions of public sector workers. One of the scandals, one of the big losses they incurred was with the company, a group of companies called Steinhoff, and the collapse of the Steinhoff enterprise affected the Public Investment Corporation very greatly, because they had lent money to Steinhoff, then Steinhoff was living beyond. Steinhoff had been one of the delinquent major companies in this country. It affected many chain stores as well as the pension funds. Of all of these, AMCU seems to be the union which seems to have fared very well. They managed to get 250,000 members in the aftermath of the Marikana killings. The net loss was with the National Union of Mine Workers, the COSATU union. AMCU is an independent union. AMCU has formed a Labour Party. One is yet to, I don't think they have participated in any of the elections. The other union, which has attempted the end at electoral politics was NUMSA in the form of Evan Jim. We'll probably come to that later. The pre-1994 business families still remain dominant. That's the Anglo-American, the Oppenheimer family, and this is, we're talking here families, the Rupert family, and a whole lot of other individuals who are all regarded as being oligarchs or people who have immense wealth and influence in government. And with chain store operators in clothing, retail, food. The non-union oligarchs are post-1994 is somebody called Putuma Nhleko, who is a former CEO of MTN. MTN, as I said, is the cellular company with major investments, not only in South Africa, but on the African continent, Nigeria, for instance. Tokyo Sequoia is another through his holdings. Patrice Motsepe, who is the brother-in-law of Cyril Ramaphosa, is one of the big oligarchs. He is supposed to have built African rainbow minerals, and he tends to have he's a billionaire around billionaire with mining, finance, energy. He has significant political influence, family connections, and with business. Of course, the other bunch were not very clearly seen now in South Africa, but who had access to large amounts of money, to government funds, as well as to cabinet ministers and the president of the time. Jacob Zuma was the Gupta family, notorious family who ran off or escaped South Africa at the time when the authorities were wanting to charge them. So the multi-billion rand procurement and state-owned enterprise network, this group is diffuse but powerful. Individuals who gained wealth from Eskom coal contracts, Transnet locomotives, Prasa signaling, the airways catering, and municipal tenders. So they've got tentacles in all sorts of things. They may not be well known by names, but form a core of oligarchic influence around state-owned enterprise supply chain. What has happened to the investments? Have workers benefited from the investments of the unions? Of all of these, SACTWA is about the only one listed to have a limited strike funds to assist workers. The others, others tend to use the funds from the investments for strengthening the bureaucracy and not the workers. Job losses in the mining sector, we had Anglo-American Platinum Amplat, 3,700 in 2024. Impala Platinum, 3,900 jobs. Sibania also lost thousands. Siriti, thousands, again at 1,137 to 1,200. Lonman, that was the Impala, announced large-scale restructuring proposals in mid-2010. Up to 6,000 jobs were at risk. That would have been one of the reasons or for the strike action, the proposed retrenchments. Impala in 2018 announced again 13,400 job reductions. So these tend to be fairly routine in the mining industry. If I could quickly run through some of the major strikes, I don't know if I've got.
Carry on, Roy. It's so important. Keep going, Roy. You're okay.
Okay. Okay, here we are. Major strikes in South Africa. We've had that in 2007. We've had, sorry, I might be out of order here, but anyway, 2012, we had the Lonman strike. We've already said that the basic demand there was for 12,500 rands wages per month. And they were earning in the region of about 6,000. They repeated this strike in 2014, again demanding 12,500. That was the 2012, 2014, and in 2013, oh, sorry. Yeah, 2013, we had the seasonal workers on the farms in the Cape area, a place called Durance, and in the surrounding areas. We've had workers, seasonal workers, sorry, go on a protest, and they were requiring or demanding a salary increment from the 69 rands per day, which they were earning. Eventually, government stepped in, and their pay was set to 105 rands per day. So we've had that, and with workers blockading roads, the national road, which is through the N2, it's a national road running through, was blockaded, and so on, by people who were earning really wretched amounts of remuneration. In 2019, the workers at the state-owned airline also went on strike because there were 944 jobs had been planned for cuts. The next one is a protected strike. These are the big strikes. In 2023, on July 6th, there was a national day of action. Millions of workers, you could talk about that, millions of workers in mining, manufacturing services, down tools. But that's, yeah, and if I could look at you could see the number that lost jobs in the mines there. If in my closing remarks, and I could probably pick up other things as we go along. For the first non-racial elections in 1994, billions were pumped into the ANC coffers by the Saudis, Gaddafi, the imperialists, as well as private funders. The ANC was so awash with funds that they did not even cash a check from one of the small funders for 1 million rand. It just laid somewhere in the desks. The first resistance to the Mandela government did not come from the unions, but in 1999, from township residents who protested lack of municipal services and poor living conditions. In all of the many civil society protests and street actions, street freeway barricades for service delivery, unemployment, etc., the unions are neither supportive nor visible. The attempts at a united front by civil society activists to bring in the trade unions didn't meet with much success. NUMSA, with its shrill socialist rhetoric, did not commit. Even NUMSA's electoral 2019 attempt at their party, at a political party with the with Irvin Jim, the General Secretary, as a presidential candidate, flopped badly. They did not participate in later elections. The 350,000 members of NUMSA did not come out en masse to vote for the bureaucratic leader. Expectations were high, but only 2,000, at least 24,719 voters voted for NUMSA. That was the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party, SRWP. This represented 0.15% of the votes cast, and this was the national election in 2019. 0.15% of the votes cast, and that's including radicals in the left who would have voted for the SWRP or SRWP, and less than 7% of NUMSA members and radicals voted for the Union's party. NGOs and donor agencies fund several training programs annually for NUMSA and as well for the AMCU. Similar assistance is given to AMCU, especially the President Joseph Mathunjwa. Now we come to this last weekend, Friday and Saturday. It's the weekend of what is observed in South by the unions and SACP as Red October. For this weekend's event celebrating Red October, it was to be led by the General Secretary of the SACP and the President of the Mine Workers Union. And this was a march to the opposition parties, that's in Cape Town, where we are the leading party here, but the opposition nationally, leading party in this province, to the opposition's provincial offices on Friday, and to ESCOM and the Labour Department on Saturday. It was not against the neoliberal pro-imperialist government of which they are part. Red October did not have in its sight the current genocides in the world. Only a few unionists attend non-wage related protests and demonstrations, even on weekends. In Cape Town, I observed this when I was in Durban as well. The NUM leader, for instance, in Lonman, at the time of the Marikana upheaval, used to be driven around because he couldn't face his own union members, was driven around in a police militarized vehicle, something called the Nyala, to the strike sites. The current COSATU president was part of the delegation with a speaking role when the oligarchs and Afrikaners, together with the oligarch president Ramaphosa, appealed to Trump in the White House. So she also went and was part of that delegation. The fellow from Fedusa used to go around with the Minister of Finance on international roadshows. So they became fairly embedded in the structures of the state and sought their best when the financial situation was under threat. The finance minister would go out and the unions would accompany him. As for the radicals, the left radicals in this country, the last 35 years have also seen a new breed of activists. A fair number of the left radicals of the past who did not join the ANC have been operating at the level of funded, usually single-issue NGOs. Many of these organizations continue to look fondly at the current trade unions, especially SAFTU, and for a long time it was COSATU before that, with Vavi and NUMSA as being the chief people that they would look fondly at. Vavi used to be an ardent supporter of Jacob Zuma. He was what I would call one of the three dance maidens on the stage, on the electoral stage, at least on the stage, the platforms of election rallies, together with SACP General Secretary and the Youth League President, Malema, before both Vavi and Malema came to grief with the ANC. My view on the working class: the struggle for the emancipation of the working class continues, but it's a mammoth task. The working class is vastly bigger than the treacherous trade union movement, especially given that some 77% of workers are not in unions, not including the huge army of wretched, employable unemployed. The state takes no responsibility for providing jobs, save for a privileged bureaucratic layer. They tend to kick the employment can down the road to business, who in turn bleat monotonously that the business of business is business, quoting their guru, Milton Friedman. Okay, I'll stop there.
Okay, right. First thing I want to do is I want to thank you, because it has been quite an extensive amount of information that you have provided, and it represents a lot of work and research that you have done. So I want to thank you for that. For the rest of the meeting, I took a conscious decision to extend it, because it's important that the totality of the information be made available to the meeting. So with that comment, I see Finn's hand up, and if any other comrade wishes to speak, then they just raise one hand on the system at the bottom of the page. Finn?
Yes, just two questions. Thank you, Roy, for that very extensive and extremely detailed description of what the unions are doing. So it's very, very useful. But I've just got two questions you might have a look at. One is the Democratic Alliance. What kind of support is it picking up, and is it really an alternative to the ANC, or what's its base in South African society? That's my first question. And the second one relates to South Africa's case in the International Criminal Court regarding the genocide. Is that having an effect amongst the youth in South Africa? Because the issue of Gaza and genocide is a very important radicalizing and mobilizing force amongst young people. And I'm wondering, is that being reflected within South Africa, that case that the government is taking into court?
Okay, Finn. Any other comrade wish to come in at this stage?
Yeah, I could come on.
Yeah,
Yeah, the Democratic Alliance has managed to take control of the Western Cape province for a long, for quite a while now. I think for the last 15 years or so. But the conditions of misery are still very stark in this province. The Democratic Alliance styles itself as a party which must promote European Union interests. It tends to imagine that the Western Cape is part of Europe. It has come out very strongly, very early on in about 3 years ago on the side of Ukraine, without any discussion with the residents of the city. For instance, the Democratic Alliance blazoned the city hall in the colors of Ukraine. They tend to be quite NATO linked or European linked. When it took them, even now, they are very reluctant to speak out against the genocide. The federal leader of the party said one needed to define what genocide was, because there are different types of genocide. So unfortunately, the kind of support they might otherwise have got, they have lost from conscious thinking people in the country and in the province. They might just be, they are part of now the government of national unity. And so they tend to control or try to set up a balancing mix within the ruling structures. But it's far too much like the old regime to be of any use, politically speaking. They certainly don't. I think they are more inclined to think in terms of being well, it's a right-wing party. So it's got all the trappings of that, and they tend to be. They are moneyed, they are funded by the local big business houses, but in the last elections in 2024, saw a whole range of 1-2-person parties. People formed parties for the sole purpose of ensuring that individuals, their leader, whose faces appeared, would get into parliament, and many of them did get in. And they were heavily funded by the Oppenheimers and so on. The Oppenheimers and the other huge mining houses want to spread their support to various formations. And with a bit of luck, they would be able to get some pro-imperialist, pro-Western candidates who would get into parliament and hopefully get to the various committees where a lot of the deals or the decisions are made. The various committees are the kinds of places they go for, whether it's the finance committees, the parliamentary committees. They seem to think that's where they need, being 1-person, 2-person parties, that's where they need to go. Okay. So the genocide, South Africa's case, for the genocide, I think it's going through the motions. Because having started it, the government itself may not have been very enthusiastic. The former foreign minister, Pandor, had let it be known that please make your submissions and make your preparations to go to the ICJ secretly. Don't let it be known, because once the parliament and so on get to know, they would put a brake on it. So that is the constraints under which they operated, but they've started, and so they've gone. So mainly at the time when they went, they were the only country, but since then they have been joined by others. But there is very little political consciousness in this country. Unfortunately, we've lost that. So the vast majority of the people, those with access to television, have some idea of the genocide and so on. But there's still room for massive education, political education in this country, and the ruling party and the other parties are not in a position to do it or are not interested in doing it. Thank you.
Okay, right. Thank you. Enrico?
Yeah. Sorry for my voice, but I have a sore throat, so I hope that you can understand me anyway. Now, the first thing that I want to say is my appreciation in what Chetty Roy say. I was, to be honest, not prepared to such analysis. I was afraid to hear the usual rhetoric about the fight for democracy, for apartheid, etc. Instead, I really appreciate in what Roy say. And I want to go back to the point, because we see that the situation in South Africa is not the best situation that you can expect it, especially after all a history of a fight and battle of the working class that they had and what they did, and they still do it. In my opinion, the point is we have to go back and analyze the use on what the trade unions can do and what the trade unions cannot do. In sense that if we look in, been a long debate in the beginning of 19th century between Lenin and the social democracy Kautsky, etc., regarding the role that the trade unions have in the society. The trade unions, of course, is a tool that serves to unify the working class, is the school of war against capitalism. But the remark that Lenin was pointed out was that the trade unions, if they don't have a communist party that can guide them inside, that can guide them, will be a tool that will be taken by the bourgeoisie, because is not any other possibility. So, in my opinion, I think I am not. I must say I didn't really study a lot the situation of South Africa, but the first impression that I have is that even with the strengths that the working class had with the strike, with battle, with fight, but because I put in brackets, in interrogative, because I don't know exactly the situation, but with a missing communist party that was leading and guide and direct the trade unions, that of course, unfortunately, we have the result that there is now in this day. And I finished that because I'm sorry, but my opinion is only that all the effort that the working class did and still doing without a leading communist internationalist party didn't have any possibility to beat the return or the continuation of the capitalism in South Africa using other tools, or using ANC, or using the so-called movement to reintroduce and rebuild the capitalism, the power of the finance of the capitalism in South Africa. So what do you think? My question is, what do you think? And more or less, just finish that. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrico. I know Enrico had problems there with speech. I just remind comrades that there is the script at the bottom of the pages, which can assist in this situation. And as somebody with impaired hearing myself, I found it useful, and I thank Enrico.
I have more problem in writing in English, believe me.
You did well. Any other comrade wish to make any comment or ask any questions before Roy comes back again? Roger?
Well, I think we'd all agree, but I'd like to just spell out again the lessons of what Comrade Roy said. First of all, I thought his lead off was very, very comprehensive and detailed, and absolutely, a tremendous value to all of us. And that's what really why we have these discussions, is to arm ourselves with the real background information or the knowledge to be able to draw the most productive conclusions. So, I mean, I think there's probably no country in recent history. I want to say recent, probably in the last half century, which has such vital and such clear lessons to teach all of us, to teach workers involved in struggles anywhere in the world. It's really crucial because, first of all, the South African regime, the apartheid regime, was the most horrible and brutal regime probably that existed in the entire world, following the downfall of the fascist regimes of the 30s and 40s. It was based on literal slavery for the working class. It was propped up by massacres and by torture and mass imprisonment, and in fact the complete degradation of the entire population, the entire working population, who were not considered even human beings but were just considered no more than pack animals. And at the same time, also, it was probably one of the supreme examples of worldwide international solidarity that we saw with the anti-apartheid movement that developed in the 70s or the 80s, and which actually was instrumental in forcing the ruling class worldwide to bring pressure on the South African regime, this brutal slave owning regime, forcing it to make concessions and to do a deal with the leaders of the resistance movement. And so, I mean, nothing could be clearer. It's absolutely stark. The brutality of the ruling class, the extreme oppression of the working class, and the worldwide solidarity, which actually played a material there was a material factor in bringing an element of victory to the working class, at least superficially speaking. But also since then, I don't think we've ever seen such a clear and sharp and sudden uh, betrayal of a movement that we saw there. That as soon as the new uh, regime took power, a regime which was not based on racial oppression, but simply on pure, unadulterated economic exploitation, that when that regime is the most corrupt that you could imagine. Who could have imagined? I mean, you had, for instance, a personification of that is Ramaphosa, the current president of South Africa, who in the 70s he was a leader of the mine workers. He was considered to be one of the most militant of the union leaders. Actually, some comrades who are here now, including me, actually had the opportunity to meet him at one time, and we had a meeting of at that time of the CWI, and I can't remember the circumstances, but we actually physically met him, two or three of us, and he portrayed himself as a revolutionary workers' leader, and we see now he's just absolutely what do you call it, rolling in corruption of the most extreme and most obnoxious kind, and completely. Can we imagine that when there was the mine workers' strike a few years ago in Marikana, which Roy referred to, that they actually massacred. This is the regime which was led by people who claimed to be leaders of the working class and leaders specifically of the miners, and who actually turned the guns of the regime and mowed down whole numbers of striking workers. So, obviously, this is a lesson to everybody. And what is the lesson? That there's a kind of feeling of excitement around the world today at seeing the constant protests and uprisings and mobilizations that have been taking place around the world, which has been the case for the last uh, really a decade or more. Revolutions, uprisings, protests, overthrowing of old regimes, and so on, which we've seen again even in the last year or two in some of the countries of East Asia, for instance, and before that in Latin America and so on. And we can all feel jubilant and we can all feel happy at seeing this token, this demonstration that the working class again and again rises up to try to break its chains and be free of oppression and exploitation. But protest, it's so clear, and nowhere more clearly than in South Africa, that protest is simply not enough. We can't be complacent about seeing this movement of workers struggling to free themselves around the world. These mass movements which have overthrown one dictator, one political exploiter after another, but it's simply not enough. And therefore, what is needed is a proper political program. It's what Trotsky called about the steam and the piston. That the steam is the energy, the revolutionary energy of the masses, but the piston is a revolutionary leadership and a party and a clarity. And of course, there are many little groups which all mouth the same platitudes almost of, okay, we need a leadership and whether, but of course, you don't build a leadership simply by proclaiming yourself. You develop a leadership by constant discussion, interaction, and above all, keeping the finger on the pulse of the working class and learning from the movements of the working class. And that's really what Win in its small way, and we don't pretend to be by any means the only people doing it, but Win plays its part in trying to develop that, in looking at the experiences of workers around the world, both current struggles and historical precedents, and to try to draw the conclusions which will enable in future that new revolutionary movements of the working class will not be betrayed and will not be dissipated, but will actually lead to a change in the whole conditions of that the human race is living under worldwide. So that's my, if you like, fairly obvious point, but I think nevertheless it's a point which needs hammering home.
Thank you, Roger. Comrade Mahendra, I saw a hand waving there. I wasn't sure whether you wanted to speak or not. No. Any other comrade wish to come in? Dominic?
Hear me?
Yeah, we hear you now.
It's just a bit of a daft question in a way. A lot of publicity has been given by Trump to the so-called refugees from South Africa. Could you put that in some sort of context, like you mentioned about the Cape and how elements there regarded the Cape as part of Europe and not part of South Africa, and how the political movement there was a sort of white movement. Could you tell us anything about these so-called refugees coming from South Africa, to America?
Yeah. Okay.
Roy, could
Yeah.
I put a linked question to that? About 10 years or so ago, there was an emergence of some musical videos promoted by white South Africans. For example, there was one which I personally found a very, very nice piece of propaganda, as well as having an emotional content, which was a tribute to General De La Rey in the Boer War. Now, these people identified themselves as modern Boers, but again, carrying the prejudice of the whites with them. And the question I would ask is, has a Boer, or more particularly a white underclass, developed in South Africa that can identify itself as a community or as a race that wishes to be, its identity to be retained as white first? Or is there a possibility of, or any examples of class struggle emerging from the white sectors of the community? Or is it just nonsense to think that there's any divisions at all?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. The first one of the Afrikaners as refugees, I think it's just another bit of Trumpism. With the urgings of somebody like Elon Musk, who used to be here. And I think a lot of us have the view that Trump has listened to Musk. There is no validity in the issue of Afrikaners talking of a genocide. It's actually to make nonsense of the genocide in Gaza, and now we see in Sudan, which people are speaking of. But certainly it's a mockery. It's Trump offering Afrikaners for political expedience, offering them a refugee status, which is free entry, if they could satisfy some conditions to get into America. And that is to the exclusion of every other type of refugee, deserving refugees who are fleeing regimes all over the place. A lot of these war-torn areas are war areas that have been created by America in the first place. America and Netanyahu have been responsible for the slaughter and for the wars in so many places where millions have perished in the last, since 9/11, 2001, 2003. We've had almost 7 countries being either laid waste or in the process of being laid waste, Sudan being one of them, as a result of the excuse to get rid of the terrorists and so on, the war on terror. Anyway, just very quickly, we know what has happened in Syria. He's actually welcomed and imposed a known terrorist who has been beheading people as the president there. No. South Africa is not like that. We do know, and let me admit that there have been murders on the farms. And this tended to be, and I don't know if it's at the level that is being claimed, and if one has seen footage of rows of white crosses alongside a road, signifying the number of people killed. I don't want to downplay that. But by the same token, people all around, this is the crime capital of the world. People are being killed. And I think even in the White House, such statements were made to Trump that it's not just the Afrikaners. The Afrikaners were not being singled out as a group. And of course, the Afrikaners, South Africa now is a very different place 35 years later. Blacks and whites mix quite easily. You would hardly find anybody saying, I used to be a racist or I don't like blacks. That's not it. That's gone. So there isn't a white threat. I think people who have gone to America are opportunists. They've chosen a way. The door has been open for them. And in my view, that's what they've taken with the assistance of Trump, or in fact, with these whatever legal mechanisms he takes upon himself to do. I think my greater concern is for Trump's own terror within his country, with the arrests in the middle of the night, a day, at anywhere, of people they consider to be migrants or foreigners, and parceling them off, sending them off to countries, to one of our neighbors here, a country that was called Swaziland is now called Eswatini. There's always been talk from the British about sending people to Rwanda. And so there's all kinds of arrangements to make. Would you go to Sudan? I will send them to Sudan. So people who have escaped one boiling pot or a frying pan are now being sent elsewhere. But that is the nature of the politics we have now with Europe and the NATO countries and the way they affect the rest of the world. Trump is a bully, plain and simple. And it has deadly consequences for the planet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comrade back in again? Everybody's shy. There's a question I would ask you, Roy, and it's on this presentation. The slides that you have been using, there's a tremendous amount of very valuable information. And I would ask you that if over the next period it would be possible to put those slides together for distribution among the comrades for reference.
Yeah, I could email the file. It's all on a file.
Lovely. I thank you.
So fortunately, it's technically possible for me. I didn't have great success starting out.
And we lost one technical changes last week, so I hope you'll be able to replace them.
Okay.
Any comrades' final moments?
Well, let me just quickly also say about the DA and about conditions in this country. The large majority of people live very badly. Following the 94 elections and even before, people migrated from what was the Bantustans and ended up looking for opportunities in the city, whether it's jobs, schools for the children, university places, just about anything. But there's no housing. None has been provided. No council houses have been provided. You don't see any high-rise buildings. You don't see any buildings of any kind. There was a problem or an attempt at, or they still that attempt with a bit of money to do RDP houses, which is little matchboxes that were even smaller than the houses that we called matchboxes when we were growing up. These are about a quarter the sizes of the houses put up by the regime in the townships. So even in the African townships and the so-called Indian and colored townships, you had houses that we called matchboxes, but these are just one-room type of little places, hollow blocks, and so on. And they were so badly built by tenderpreneurs that they collapsed, they cracked up, and so on within a short space. So that is it's an insult. It's the way the government operates, and they think it's quite okay that they could live in the fancy houses in Cape Town. They could buy big houses on the seafront and think the rest of the population must live. I don't know whether they think the 80-20 principle is the principle they must apply for. Keep about 20% and less happy, and they'd be able to control the other 80%. So people live very badly. All along the garden route, you've got massive luxury houses being built, or in many of the big cities, people who come on tourist trips out to South Africa normally go to what's called the garden route all along the coast. And you can see side by side, and these are not old structures, at least the properties. It's a boom for property developers who build fancy luxury buildings for those who can afford it, and it's black and white. But the people who provide the services in the factories, in the industries, in the shops, and so on, as well as the domestic and garden services provided by the poor, and these people live quite far off in huge shack lands, and they stretch as far as the eye can see. Tiny little tin shanties, which are a terrible indictment on this government that they would allow such a thing. And the DA, the opposition party, is guilty of that as much as the ANC is guilty of. So we are dealing with a pro-imperialist government which has no conscience now. And unfortunately, I think we've reaped the worst of everything. The so-called Mandela magic has been a terrible fraud and has been a disaster for this country.
Okay, right. I'm just giving a quick scan to see if anybody wants to have a final word. What I want to do, Roy, is on behalf of those present and on behalf of those who have yet to see the recordings, I'd like to thank you for your contribution, for the quality of it and for the content of it, and really appreciate it. It's a subject, I think, that once we've had time to digest all the information, that we should come back to again at a later stage. what I would ask now is that we accept that the meeting is effectively over, and I would ask Roger to come in with his contribution for next week's meetings.
Okay, yes, comrades. First of all, I endorse exactly what he said. I thought it was absolutely of huge value, the contribution that Comrade Roy made. But one thing I'd like to say, which I've said on previous occasions, is we have some really outstanding analyses in our meetings, but we should have more in writing, I think, also to put as a record on our website. So I don't know, Roy, you said you could send us the statistics and the figures that you showed us, and if you could also add some commentary, some of what you said today, if you could put that in written form too, so that it's there to be seen on our website as well. Right, next week we are shifting back to the question of the USA and the Trump regime. There's been it's the horrors inflicted by the Trump regime have become as quite a shock to everybody, and there's been different explanations or descriptions of what actually it represents. And we've got, we've published material we actually on our blog, on our website, but whether or not it's correct to call the Trump regime a fascist regime, what it has in common with such regimes, what the differences are, and so on. But there's one very good Marxist comrade who's spoken to us before, Comrade John Clark, who's based in Canada, who put a very interesting piece on Facebook recently, where he's saying he dismissed the idea that it was correct to call the Trump regime fascist, and he's beginning to change his opinion on that. And we invited him to come and put his ideas to us. I think it'll be a very, very interesting and important discussion, and he's coming next week. So it's John Clark on the nature of the Trump regime next week. I think I should also add that in 2 weeks' time, we've got a bit of a scoop. We've got a comrade, an active Marxist comrade, a socialist working in New York, who's going to give us the first-hand on-the-spot report of the significance of the mayoral election the last week in New York and the election of Mamdani and what that represents. So the next two meetings, from different points of view, if you like, at different levels, is going to be discussing this very important question of the Trump regime and how to overthrow it. So hope to see comrades at both of those meetings.
Okay, comrades, thanks, Roger. With that, I would say we can wrap up the meeting and thank everybody for their attendance. Bye-bye, comrades.
Bye, comrades.